I want to welcome everybody to this year's virtual Leaders of Tomorrow presentation. You guys are going to be very excited to see what's coming up. You've got 4 incredible speakers. I'm lucky enough to know all 4 and how they've met their success in life. My name is Orvis Campbell. I'm your county sheriff. I'm not nearly as talented as the 4 you're about to meet and see, but I wanted to come here today to act as your MC to kind of let you guys know that there's a whole world out there that's just eager to help you succeed. And there's a few things you can do in life to help along with that. And that's kind of what these presentations are about. They're trying to let you see a path that others have found to success and happiness in life. Because it takes work, but it's not necessarily as much work as you think. Because with the right attitude, you'll find you'll get a lot of help from people and that they'll lift you up in life and help you succeed. I, for one, don't believe at all that there's anything, that there's no such thing as a self-made man. I come from a very poor family. You know, our home was condemned by the health department my senior year, but my entire life, people lifted me up without ever asking. People made sure I succeeded. And all you had to do is do your part. What is your part? Well, your part is work hard. Be a coworker, be a friend, the kind of people that people want to be around. Be a person that wants to help others, and you're going to find out that when you're in need, those people are going to come out for you, and they're going to make sure that you succeed. So Leaders of Tomorrow is a great opportunity to start setting your mind to these types of thoughts. It's been around a number of years. It gets great reviews. I'm so proud that I've gotten to participate with the Leaders of Tomorrow program for the last few years. And I hope that you'll be excited as well as you go through these presentations. The people you're going to meet have, in some cases, started with absolutely nothing and built a very successful career or a business. And you're going to wonder, how do they do it? How do some people do it and others fail? And today is a great opportunity for you, and over the series of videos that you're going to see at your school, for you to learn how some of the local people that have succeeded at such a high level here in Tuscarawas County have done it. During this year especially, the COVID year, I think we all come to realize that it's pretty important to learn to deal with stress, to learn to manage your feelings, to understand that it's okay to ask for help. And I'm not sure if you're aware that in Tuscarawas County there's a lot of great places to go and get some help. One of the very best people that can get you to where you need to be and improve your life and your feelings is my good friend Natalie Bollon of the ADAMHS Board, the Alcohol, Drug Addiction, Mental Health Services Board, right here in New Philadelphia. She's here to help, and I think that she could do you a lot of good. My God, would you two stop?
Hi everyone, my name's Natalie Bollon and I am with the Alcohol, Drug Addiction, Mental Health Services Board, the ADAMHS Board of Tuscarawas and Carroll County. And I was asked to do this presentation to take a look at pandemic, the effect on our mental health, the effect on our general well-being. So here's what I put together. Hopefully by the end of this you'll have a little bit of insight. When I started doing this presentation, it was 2020, and we all know how 2020 went and how it wrapped up. It is now 2021 and we are still struggling to have a very good year. So that's why the addition of "and 2021 isn't starting off so great" was added to our presentation. In addition to the pandemic, we have family members that have been sick. We've been quarantined. We are missing out on kind of rites of passage of our youth, our proms, our homecomings, our graduations. So in general, for society, this is a very tough time, but this is a tough time at a different level for our kids. So the way that I wanted to do this was I wanted to take a look at other times in history that were pretty tough. So we're going to go through a little bit of a history lesson here. So I wanted to start with the early 1900s and what a difficult time that was. When you look at the early 1900s, our homes had no indoor plumbing, we had no phones, no cars. 85% of men over the age of 14 were in our workforce. That's compared to 69% of our men over 16 today. And they were working around 55 hours a week. Most of our teenagers did not attend school. Women in that time, we were working primarily as teachers, and the reason that they were gravitating toward that profession is because not only did the male school board members see them as more loving, but they were also willing to do whatever the male school board members said at a lower pay than men would have. The other thing I think that was pretty interesting when I was doing this research was when you look at what the diet was around that time. Americans around the early 1900s were eating almost as much lard as they were chicken, and those were their primary two sources of food intake, which is why right there I've included the picture of lard. And lard is literally a byproduct of fat of a pig, and they would heat that up and they would toss some onions on it, and they would put some seasoning and some paprika, and that accounted for 14% of their diet. Chicken was 16%. When you look at Americans now, our two favorite foods are pizza and steak. Some of the other things that were pretty interesting in the early 1900s is that we moved from farming to mass production. And as you can see, that's why our kids ended up working big machines. So they were dropping out of school, they were going to work in mass manufacturing, they were one of the primary breadwinners and earners for their family. And around this time, only 28% of our 14 to 18-year-olds were in school. So then we're going to jump forward a little bit to the Depression. Again, a really tough time in our American history. And at this time, 1 out of every 4 of our family members, our parents, our dads, typically at that time, were out of work. And when you're out of work, you typically are losing your home. And so they're getting evicted, and they are on the side of the road, and they're living in tents. And we have people in Arkansas that are living in caves, and we have families in California that are living in sewers. Our families at that time started to do without the daily necessities like bread, like milk. Shoes were passed down among siblings regardless of the shape that they were in. Families were going to soup kitchens. 3 and 4 families were living together in homes at the time. So when you look at the 1900s into the 1929s, when we had the Great Depression and the stock market crash, we're still moving through a very tough time in America. I jumped ahead quite a bit to the 1970s, and that was pretty important in Ohio for a couple reasons. The Vietnam War was going on, but in Ohio specifically, just an hour north of us at Kent State, the students held a massive protest. Around 2,000 students got together to boycott and voice their concerns about the Vietnam War. It was so large and so emotional that the National Guard was called in. And despite attempts to calm down tension, the National Guard actually ended up firing shots into the crowd of our students, and 4 individuals lost their lives during this time, during a protest related to the Vietnam War. There also still continued to be a struggle of inequality in gender, and the Equal Rights Amendment is something that we began to work on as a society. Women at that point were really pushing for equal pay and equal hours. And it was thought that this was going to be an easy thing to pass across our states. Passed through Congress, but it needed to pass across our states as well. And it took until 1977 for the final state to approve the ERA amendment. So why am I talking to you about history? Let me share one more time in history with you. Well, this is when I grew up. Not necessarily a lot of drama in the 1980s, but we definitely had our own issues. A lot of hairspray, a lot of curling irons. So why am I showing you these things? This is not a history lesson, but I want to make a little bit of humor available, because humor, as we know, is one of the things that get us through tough times most significantly. And when you look at our history, we know that you come from strong stock. If you're here now, you have family members who have been through the early 1900s. You have family members who at 14, 16, maybe age 8 were working in factories to support their parents, their siblings. We know that you had family members who may have stood up for a war or in support of a war. We know that you had family members who were eating lard as a way to keep your family alive and safe. So you come from good stock, and you come from people who survive and adapt and persist and endure and hold on. These are all parts of your genetic makeup at this point. And that is why we're going through the history lesson. And the reason this is so important is because perspective has such an important part of our mental health. This is one of my favorite gifts to show when I do presentations like this. So give me 1 second to pull this up. So when I do presentations like this, I usually do it in front of an audience, and then there gets to be some really good back and forth discussion about what we see here. But here's what I want you to see here. Fundamentally, nothing has changed about this individual's circumstances. The water depth hasn't changed. It's as deep as it was. The rope isn't any more taut or tight than it was 10 seconds ago. What's changed is his perspective. He is now standing up with the help of a support person. Everything else about the situation has remained the same. And so that's one of the most important things that I want you to take away from this discussion of perspective and history, is that things will always change and things will always get better. But part of it is making sure that we're just looking at a situation differently. Sometimes we need help to get our perspective to change. Sometimes we can learn to stand up on our own. And when you look at this young man's face, how scared he is, how emotional he is, versus the immediate calm when he's able to have that perspective shift, his feet on the ground, and looking at the situation differently. A perspective shift does not cure everything, though. It's a very helpful tool, and it's a tool that you're going to use every day of your life once you start to grab a hold of this, but a perspective shift does not cure everything. And so some of the things that I want to talk about at this point in the presentation is what happens when a perspective shift isn't enough. It's really normal during a traumatic time or a stressful time, during a pandemic, to feel depressed, to feel irritable, to feel sad, angry, worried, very, very typical and normal feelings. In addition, these are all typical and normal feelings of adolescence and teenage years. But the thing that's important is when it gets a little bit more significant in that. In the world of behavioral health or mental health, one of the things that we talk about is that 2-week point. Feelings come and go. And again, that's a normal part of growing up in adolescence. But once they hit that 2-week point of being there consistently, greater than 2 weeks, more days than not, is when we start to get a little bit concerned. And some of the things that we look at that make us concerned are you having sleep issues? Are you wanting to sleep all the time? Are you not sleeping at all? Are you sleeping but then waking up and worrying? How's your appetite? If your appetite increases significantly and stays up over a 2-week period or decreases significantly, that can be another warning sign. Irritability. Again, it's normal to be irritable, but it's that irritability that doesn't go away, that's consistently there, that's just a general feeling inside of you. Difficulty concentrating. And again, all of these things, when they pile up and when they're not addressed, can lead to suicidal thoughts. We're really hitting on depression and anxiety at this point in the discussion, and they're often lumped together, and there are 2 most frequently occurring diagnoses, but they're really different. There's some similarities, but fundamentally they're different. With depression, you're feeling pretty flat. Your energy's low. Your tone of voice is low. With anxiety, you're pretty keyed up. You feel fearful. You're worried. You're thinking a lot about future events. You always seem tight and tense. While it's important to know the difference, it's also important to know you can have one without the other, or you can have them together. So when you want to consider counseling is when you're getting to the point where that overwhelmed feeling is not going away. Whether you're shifting perspective, whether you're finding things to do with your time, you are still consistently feeling overwhelmed and your thoughts are racing. That fatigue that we talked about a second ago, it's not something that you can shake. You're constantly feeling like you're moving at a slower pace. Anger, rage, resentment, again, something that doesn't go away. Maybe there's a level 2 problem and you're responding to it with a level 8 amount of anger. That's not typical, not healthy. That can be another warning sign when it's time to consider counseling. Agoraphobia, which basically means I don't feel like leaving my house, and if I need to, I'm going to be very stressed out to do that, so I'm going to prefer to stay isolated. Those anxious or intrusive thoughts that we talk about. we talk a lot about the tape that you play in your head when we're in a counseling session. And it's very important to be aware of what that tape is. What are those words that you're consistently telling yourself over and over? And are those words creating more anxiety in you? Apathy. If there's something that you used to enjoy, if you played music, if you baked, if you did art, if you hung out with your friends, but none of those things are appealing to you anymore, you just can't get the motivation up to do it, that's another big one, that it's something more significant than just dusting yourself off and moving forward. Similarly, the feeling of hopelessness. This is never going to get better. I know when this started last March, and then Governor DeWine began to open things up back in May, 2 months later, I remember thinking, oh, thank God that's over. I'm so glad that we're done with that whole pandemic and quarantine thing. And I have to admit, I felt pretty hopeless when I realized not much is going to change at that point. So that feeling of hopelessness can creep in a lot of different ways. In social withdrawal, our friends, our family are really a source of support, and whenever we feel ourselves pulling back from them and withdrawing from them, that's another sign that maybe we're getting to a point that's bigger than just staying at home and having no intervention. Counseling still has a lot of stigma though. We're working very hard to decrease it, but I've never met anyone who can't benefit from some type of counseling. And so I wanted to share these couple of slides. And when you look at this, 77% of individuals, of Americans that were polled, were either currently in counseling, they had been in counseling in the past, or they hadn't been, but they would be willing to go. So again, that number is so significant. 77% of individuals either have been or are willing to go to counseling. I don't think we would ever get 77% of people to admit that to us. Counseling for family members, same thing. Around 72% of individuals believe that someone in their immediate family would, or would be willing to see a counselor if necessary. Again, so much stigma attached to this that people don't talk about this, but when you quietly and confidentially survey them, 72% of our family members would go, and 77% of us individually would go. So one of the things I talk about when we look at stigma related to counseling and how to get people in the door of a counselor's office is going to a counselor or therapist when you're feeling sad or overwhelmed should be as normal as going to the doctor when you have the flu. Let's end the stigma. One of the other ways that I say this is when you have a physical ache, you go see a doctor. When you have an emotional ache, you go to a counselor. It doesn't matter if it's something that somebody can see. It doesn't matter if it's a broken bone. Fundamentally, something inside of you is hurting, and somebody with some training and experience needs to help you work through that. And just like with a broken bone, the sooner you get there, the easier and quicker it is to heal that. Having said all of this, I still know that counseling isn't the only option, and I certainly wouldn't want you to not seek a source of support because you're uncomfortable with counseling. So I wanted to throw up some other options up here. There's a crisis text line that operates across the state of Ohio 24/7. There are trained responders, and typically we see our 18, 17, 16 to 23, 24-year-old individuals using this. Somebody always answers the text. Their goal is to move you from what they call a hot moment to a cool moment, so they're just kind of calming you down and helping to de-escalate you. But that's an option for individuals who aren't comfortable walking in the door of a therapist's room. We also have a 24/7 hotline in Tuscarawas and Carroll County. Someone is always there to answer that phone to help you talk through whatever it is that's currently on your shoulders. There's also been a huge development in online support. Support groups and being with other people who are going through what you're going through is incredibly helpful. And so I wanted to toss up there the listing of an online support group for teenagers. And you also can go to people that are close to you, your school counselor, your youth pastor, your coach, your teacher. We don't do services here at the ADAMHS Board, but it's my job to know all of the services that are available to you in Tuscarawas and Carroll County. And so you can very confidentially call me or have your parents call me, and we can talk about what's going on and maybe what some of your options are to get some help. And that's the number here at the ADAMHS Board on the bottom. And the last thing that I want to come back to as we're talking about self-care and getting through a time whenever our whole lives have changed is remember to keep that perspective into account, because that really is going to make a fundamental difference into how you're feeling every day. And are you looking at that glass is half full or the glass is half empty? Thanks for taking the time to watch this. If there's anything we can do at the ADAMHS Board, please don't hesitate to let us know, and I wish you all well.